So the thing is, the title was as clickbait as I could imagine, but it seems my imagination is not that far away in terms of figuring out titles. I'm trying to click the green one, and it doesn't. Oh, that one. Yeah, OK. So I'm Robaszyński-Janiec. My first name is pretty easy, but the second one is complicated even in Poland, so don't bother trying to tell it. I'm creative director, owner, and founder of the House of Fables. This is my second game development company. And I'm creating games for almost 10 years now, and those are casual games, and since 3 years, I'm also creating VR and AR games. The House of Fables is like 20 people right now. The core business is casual games for every platform around. And VR AR is something we are experimenting with. We already released our first game, and experiences we had with this first game and other things we created is the topic of this speech. So our games are usually towards 30+ women. Those are event-type series, which are adventure games. Those are Gardens Incorporated title we are preparing for the other developer for publishing. And recently we released Event-type 3, like today, I guess. And Chronicles of Magic are coming soon after, like within 3 months. Okay. For virtual reality, we have created Wrath of Loki. This is adventure game in VR, and I will talk about it later. We are creating Trains VR. If you'd like to see how we can play with trains in VR, I have table 49 nearby, and you can play trains with me. And also, we have educational experience called ISS VR Tour, which we are creating with European Space Agency, and it's educational experience. We are also acting as sort of publisher. We are sometimes funding projects. Sometimes we are preparing projects for other developers to bring them to different platforms they can't handle alone. Those are Spirit Journey, Prison VR, and Steampunker VR. We released recently on a Chinese headset called Pico VR. And now we can get to Wrath of Loki, and it's VR, so this is the thing we are all here about. So the first thing about games is the thing what drives us in games. Where do we play games? Where do we create games? And those are a couple of things I mentioned here, and this is my point of view, so you not necessarily have to share it. The first thing is story. Trains VR is the first game out of 15 I created that doesn't have any story. All other games had story inside. Even the game where you are fixing cars in garage had story, and it was story-driven. So the story and the way we can tell those stories is the thing that is very human. And people tell stories since ages, since hundreds of ages. And this is the thing that goes through us like biologically. We learn from stories. We thrill with stories. This is the thing we love. To tell the stories from the first campfire we settled around. This is the thing which we love. The second thing is sort of adventure. So we can go for adventure from the safe place of our armchair and have something that will move us and experience things that we can do something, go follow something, figure out some puzzles, figure out some mystery. Years ago, I created a sort of romantic game, and we hoped our 30+ women will love romantic games like Jane Austen. But actually, they preferred sort of thriller things like kids buried alive in the cellar, and then you can meet their ghosts. So adventure, when you have some thrill, this is the thing we love. And so later on, we created psychological thriller when you really had some thrills. And finally, emotions. And emotions is the thing that drives us in every day. Before we think, we have emotional reaction. And in VR especially, emotions can be very, very strong. Most of VR games nowadays provide rather simple emotion, which is fear. And that's why horror games and killing zombies and zombies jumping on us are so popular. But I strive to see more emotional games in VR that are not all about fear. There's plenty of other emotions we can play with. So now about opportunities in VR we have. So the first things are those emotions, which are pretty strong in VR. And also with VR being so easy and to get in, I've seen very old people never playing any games getting into VR straight away and doing things that are planned there. The second thing is engagement. when you can spend a lot of time in VR, it leaves your VR mark on your face, where people are throwing things around so hard they are actually kicking walls and trying to destroy monitor in front of them. And also exploration. In our space experience, you can go into International Space Station, and I guess nobody in here will be able to go there anywhere in closest time. So the space travel is something we will not achieve, and we can move people actually to space without any problem, and it's going to be safer and cheaper and easier than the plans Elon Musk have. But there is no free dinners. So we have a lot of challenges in VR we have to fight through. So the first thing in VR is 3D world, and it's pretty tough to create 3D world in VR, especially in mobile VR. So this is Lara Croft, obviously. So Lara Croft, in the first version, had like 500 polygons. In 2008, it has 30K polygons. And when you create a VR game for mobile, you can create like 2 or 3 Lara Croft models to keep in polygons limit, which is about below 100,000 polygons. So it's pretty hard to create very good experience in 3D, realistic ones. That's why everybody is creating cartoonish style. And also, when you have a 3D, it's the biological thing with like 3D movies. Some people have just headaches on 3D movies. They have eye strains with 3D movies. So the same goes with a stereoscopic in VR. Our eyes are not adapted to that way of seeing stereoscopy. We have 2 different ways of seeing stereoscopically. And if we lack depth, and the screen is always at the same distance from our eyes, about 20% of people are getting eye strain and feel sick. So, and sickness, like motion sickness, is a very huge problem, both for people and for designers to go around this. People love to test themselves and go into roller coaster stuff. Still, it gets them sick, and getting someone sick because he's playing your game or your experience in VR is a very, very bad way of convincing people to just go into VR. The VR itself is hard enough to put on your head, feel dumb when people are around, and all those sort of things. So getting sick out of this experience is a very bad idea. And finally, availability. So those are current prices for VR, but you have to add about 500 euros at top of this to buy a PC. So obviously, spending about 1,000 euros for experience is quite a challenge thing for any person. And I don't think I have seen a single experience that will drive me to spend 1,000 euros. Altogether, yes, but single experiences, I haven't seen such yet. OK, so I think this is the moment for solutions. And we have few solutions, and we figure out them when we were creating Wrath of Loki. There are not obvious ones, and this is fun with VR, that when you are creating something in VR, very often you don't have anything you can take a look and just grab things and do the same way. So in Wrath of Loki, you can become a god. And this is quite an experience, and this is quite an engagement you can have. You are becoming Thor, god of thunders, and your task is to defeat Loki. So we followed Norse mythology. We picked a topic that is pretty common, mostly due to Avengers movie, which is, well, it's not exactly what happened in Norse mythology. In our game, it's closer to the original myths. And as you become god and you have very clear goal, you have to save the world. So saving the world is the ultimate goal, and there is very little space for better goals than saving the world. So to save the world, you have to go around and visit various spaces, and this includes usually moving around. But instead of moving around, we actually created the way to go around with sort of portals. And also that way, we could create various locations, each location on its own, and we had a lot of freedom in terms of development, in terms of art direction, to show the world we see it, and to show the player various spaces. So the thing is, we didn't use 3D. 3D is very expensive in terms of performance, in terms of keeping 60 frames per second or 90 frames per second. So we actually created a 2D game in VR. As crazy it sounds at the beginning, when you see the game, it's actually a very beautiful game. Our artists spent a lot of time creating those hand-drawn graphics on a stereoscopic. And this also, as it's 2D, it does not cause eye strain. So there is no forced 3D depth. We have depth that is actually drawn. And when you look at this, you see distance with all the tricks that painters figure out for hundreds of years. We had some issues here for the location that you can see that is unwrapped on the left side. Our artists prepared sketches, and they were finding for the way to show the location. And one of them was working remotely without any headset. So they prepared a lot of sketches, found the look of the location they loved on a sketch, and they said, OK, we just need to put a horizon a little bit up. And they just started finalizing. And finalizing took like a week. So when they finalized the location and tried to see how it looks in VR again, we all felt like little kids on a huge battlefield of giants. Because the small change of moving horizon made a huge change in the final picture. So we lost a week, and we had to redraw it from the beginning. So the very important thing when you are creating anything in VR, and I guess most of you already know it, is every time check if it works in VR, if it looks good in VR, and yeah, basically, if it's the same, because what you see on the monitor, what you see, even if you somewhat simulate VR, which you can do, it's not the same you see in actual hardware thing. OK, so there is no movement in our game. And as we are using mobile VR and we have a sphere around us, we don't have any movement. So we are not going to get sick. We are only rotating around. And as a core game mechanic for this game is sort of like hidden object. You are looking for things around you. You are rotating, but you are rotating very slowly. One of first experiences with people testing my VR stuff was that I was putting them on a swivel chair, and they were putting the headset on, and they were like rotating 3 times around because they could. And they immediately were removing the headset, telling, oh, VR makes me sick. And I was, no, it's not VR making you sick. It's like rotating on the swivel chair is making you sick. You can try it without VR, and it will make you sick. Anyway, so in this game, there's no movement whatsoever. So we're in a single location, which is beautiful because it's hand-drawn and very detailed, because we have a lot of pixels to make a detailed location, and you are not getting sick. It was a risk thing, and it's a risky thing in VR. When you're creating things for VR, designing mechanics for VR and gameplay for VR, the hardware may change during your development or soon after. So when we created Wrath of Loki, mobile VR didn't have any positional tracking. Later this year, Daydream, Google's hardware is going to be released, and it's going to have some sort of positional tracking. Also, porting this game to the Vive or to the Oculus seemed like impossible. But actually, for this game, we tried this, and as we have sort of parallax stuff, we have things around that are not drawn on the sphere, and it makes sort of like 3D feeling. This game still works on the positional tracking, but generally speaking, new things are coming out, and you can't bet that nothing will change. A lot of things might change. Microsoft already prepared a new headset and is going to be released next month without any additional cameras or lighthouses or whatever, so it's inside-out tracking. As the same thing with the Google's thing. There are new hand controllers coming on the market. They are changing things, so all the time you have to think about this, that what you created now might not be the same within half a year, or maybe it's already outdated as it's something happening in the laboratories all over the world. So no movement, no sickness. We don't want to have anyone sick because of our game. And finally, the platform of our choice is mobile VR. First thing, it's way cheaper. Obviously, you have to buy a phone, but people are changing phones all the time, like every year or every 2 years. So when you already have a phone, and with a Daydream, phones are getting to be prepared for VR within the next 2 or 3 years, the things are getting pretty cheap. Oculus is like 120 euros with a hand controller. If you haven't seen this controller, again, Table 49, we have a Trains VR game with a hand controller. Google's has a controller as well. And also there's a Pico VR, which is Chinese headset, but even though it's Chinese, it's pretty decent quality. They sell it with a controller, and it's all-in-one VR for just like 300 euros. So mobile VR is the way to go, in my opinion, as it's going to be a way bigger market that Vive can, or Oculus Rift, or whatever can ever be. So this solved our availability problem. With cheaper VR, we can get to the bigger audience. And for us, creating casual games in VR, the biggest audience, the better. We are not following the hardcore players. And I think this is it. I've got like 4.5 minutes for questions. So do you have any questions? Anybody?
Adam, if you don't mind, I'll kick off with a question. Just a quick one. Which of the 9 worlds are you saving as Thor?
Pardon?
Which of the 9 worlds are you saving as Thor?
So we are going. So the problem with this is actually none of them, as the first design was to go to 3 various North Gods. And actually, during the development, we figured out it will make a game too long, because Wrath of Loki's experience, it takes like 20 to 30 minutes, and the first design was for an hour and a half. But then we figured out nobody's playing a VR game for an hour and a half. I mean, there are people, hardcore players, playing for longer times, but single sessions are probably closer to half an hour, so we cut game into pieces and glue it together. And you are visiting different worlds. And in addition, we could create very different locations out of this, because the first design was like 3 hubs, very similar to each other, and that way we have locations that are various and they change all the time. So it's not the single world you are saving.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor? We have one right in the middle there. There's a mic coming to you.
Hello. I was wondering, you were talking earlier about the audience of your games, typically the hidden object games, but then you've gone for sort of Norse myths for VR, which seems maybe a slightly different audience, or do you think it will still resonate? Are you going after the same audience, I guess, is the question?
So the thing is, in the House of Fables, our adventure game series is about Slavic mythology. And those games are directly towards our casual audience, those 30-plus women. Actually, this 30-plus women is sort of like outdated thing. We have now like 60 to 40% among women versus men playing our games. But the Eventide series was a very successful one with Slavic mythology, and that's why we decided to put different mythology, like Norse mythology, and it looks like nobody have any problem with this. It does not narrow any audience, I guess. And it's still casual experience, so the audience is broad for this.